Hey guys, what's up? So I'm creating a new list for the top 10 programming languages of 2017. Yes, I am a fortune teller. I can see into the future, and 2017 is right around the corner. This list is going to be more official based on mainstream feedback. Basically, what are the top languages out there that are dominating the markets? We're not going to mention languages like Rust or Clojure or TypeScript or Elixir or all these other languages that literally shouldn't be mentioned in the top 10. They're great languages. This stuff is, there's no right and wrong answer here. It's just an opinion. But if you just want, the simple, boring list of what are the top 10 languages, and when I say boring, it just simply means that there's not going to be any shocker for the sake of being a shocker. I created a list about a month ago where I mentioned TypeScript. TypeScript is going to be a big language for 2017, but it probably shouldn't be in the top 10. Another language like Assembly. Assembly is making a pretty strong, if you look at something like the TOB index, Assembly jobs seem to be out there. But in the real world, you're not going to really find a whole lot of Assembly. Like if I'm in the DC area, if I'm looking for a job in DC, I don't see a whole lot of Assembly jobs. I see a lot of what we're going to talk about in this list. So let's get into the mainstream list here and start talking about it. All right, number 10, Perl. We're not gonna shit on Perl this time. So Perl needs to be in the top 10. Perl used to be the Swiss Army chainsaw, held the web together with duct tape and Scotch tape and glue and all that crap. But Perl is still widely used. It's a great scripting language. It's going to continue to be popular. Perl, the newest standard, was also just released last year. Number 9, Ruby. Everybody's like, where's Ruby on the last list? Well, Ruby got hosed because I decided to add Ruby. I kicked off Ruby because I wanted to be able to add a functional language like Haskell. But in order to have a language like Haskell or Scala listed in the top 10 or F#, you have to boot one of these larger languages. But it doesn't do any justice because Ruby is going to dominate over those languages. Like I mentioned, there's going to be way more jobs in Ruby and opportunity for you in Ruby than there is going to be for Rust or Clojure or Elixir and all this other stuff. So I'm sorry to say it, but that's the mainstream, mentality. That's what people want to hear, and it's honestly the truth. Number 8 is Swift. So Swift is going to be Apple's newest language. Essentially, it's some people say it's Apple's attempt to make Objective-C easier to deal with. That programmers didn't want to have to do the Objective-C, and it was too hard for them, so they decided to create a Python, more simplistic language. Not really similar to Python, but a simplistic language when compared to Objective-C. So Swift is the Apple language. Every programming software company has a language. Google has their language now with Golang, and Microsoft has C#, and Apple now has Swift. PHP, everybody really got pissed off when I didn't mention PHP. PHP runs a lot of websites out there. It's WordPress, all the e-commerce shops, OpenCart, Magento, PrestaShop, and all these other things. If you want to do e-commerce, PHP is almost your only option, it seems like. But it's still going to dominate. It's a rather terrible language when you compare it to something like C# or Java. But PHP, it does grow on people. It can get the job done, and a lot of people make a full-time living on PHP. So you can't really hate on them for that. It's just that I would never recommend it as a first language just because it does teach some very terrible habits. Number 6 is Python. Python arguably deserves to be higher than this, but in a real-world list, if we're looking at this as objectively as possible, there's going to be more opportunities for the jobs that I mentioned after, or for the languages I mentioned after Python here, but Python is going to make this list at 6. It's an awesome language. It's a language for web, robotics, bioinformatics, for pretty much everything Python's involved in it. But it falls at number 6 here. Number 5 is JavaScript. JavaScript was my number 1 language in 2016. It was also, I think, the number 2 language on the list that includes some of the shockers that I had on there, like Haskell and Assembly and TypeScript. But in this list, this more predictable list, JavaScript is going to sit at 5. Number 4 is C++, the programming language for games. Barney Stroustrup came out of Bell Labs in the 1980s and created C++ and actually worked for what would remain of Bell Labs all the way up until, I think, into the 90s for sure. But still, it's a very powerful language. It powers most of the video games that we see, so a lot of video game engines are written in C and C++. And there's still going to be a lot of opportunity out there for C++. In fact, it's a very humongous code base when you talk about all the legacy code written in it. Number 3 is C#, Microsoft's language of choice. Microsoft language is now open source, and I had this as the number 1 as more of a shocker. But if, like I said, we're looking at this completely objectively, then C# probably belongs at number 3. They're doing a lot of stuff to open source the language, but it's really not an option outside of Microsoft, at least at the present. And you guys are going to be like, well, mono, and you're going to tell me how it's open source now and how it works on Linux and all that shit. And I'm going to tell you that it doesn't, not at the time that I'm creating this video, and it wasn't 5 months ago when I was trying to use the Kestrel web server for a .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 1.0 site that I wanted to put on my Linux Ubuntu server, but it didn't work because I needed the goddamn database driver, and there was no database driver for Postgres or MySQL, so I was forced to use Entity Framework in order to be able to use one of those other things. And maybe I don't want to use Entity Framework, but it's not a problem with the project itself. It's just that it's relatively new. So C# is going to dominate in enterprise development. It's going to dominate for anything Microsoft, and Microsoft's a humongous company. But it's not truly the open source vision that Microsoft wants for the language, or at least that's what they say that they want. So I think it's going to be a couple more years before we truly see, C# as a viable option for my Linux Ubuntu server. And when I say I mean for other indie developers and things like that out there as well. But in the meantime, C# is an awesome language as far as like language design. It's one of the best I've ever seen. Well, actually, it's the best I've ever seen. So next, number 2 is the C programming language, the godfather of all higher level languages that pretty much every language on this list takes after. So if you look at Python or JavaScript or PHP or Perl or Ruby or Java or any of these other languages, you're going to see that they are built on top of C. So it's C code. And then C is obviously considered to be a high level language too when you compare it to something like assembly. But not being too specific about everything, C is definitely going to be on the list. Dennis Ritchie, the creator of C at Bell Labs in the 1970s, is the greatest programmer of all time. Most definitely the most important programmer of all time. Dennis Ritchie, look him up if you guys never heard of him. And then number 1 on our predictable list of the top programming languages is going to be Java. Java, why? Because it dominates the job market. It's truly open source, so you can write Java on both Linux and Windows, and it runs. It's also the language that's used for the Android SDK, so if you want to write native Android apps, you're going to have an easy time doing it in Java. If you want to get a job in enterprise development, Java's there for you. If you want to get into some embedded systems and shit like that, then even Java has a market there. But even games. So Java's all over the place. So is C#, so is C, so is C++. Any one of these top 10 languages, you're going to most likely be able to find a job. There's going to be opportunities there for you. This list is very predictable, but to be honest with you, a shitstorm gets raised when I'm not predictable. So it seems that the masses want the predictability, and that's what this list is for. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and have a good night. Bye.